So now I would like to drill down and talk about consciousness and what we mean by conscious aging. One of the biggest questions that we get, and the most frequent question is, what do you mean by conscious aging? Anybody get that question in the room? A few? Everybody? What do we mean by conscious aging? And so I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about that. And starting out with basically the definition. We typically think of consciousness as our thoughts or cognitive processes, but it's so much more than what happens mechanically in our brains. For example, gut feelings, intuition, dreams, evidence of distant healing, and so on. And there's also the role that consciousness plays in how we relate to the world around us, our beliefs, emotions, and filters that we use to make up our own unique worldview. No one yet has fully defined consciousness or knows its origin or even why it exists, but it remains one of the greatest and most studied mysteries of human existence. We know it's there, and we can at least describe it in general terms. So at IONS, we believe that consciousness matters. And we believe it matters because the quality of our consciousness defines our experience of the world. And that, of course, applies to our aging, doesn't it? So let's talk a little bit about what conscious aging is. I like to think of conscious aging as looking at the opportunities and the challenges of aging through the lens of our emotional, spiritual, and psychological selves, so that we keep an open and accessible heart, no matter the external circumstances that may befall us. And now I'd like to talk about that a little bit. And to illustrate this, I'd like to talk about my best friend. Her name is Shelley, and her father is 98 years old. And when Shelley's dad was in the prime of his middle years, he was a very robust man. He was a professional man, he was charismatic, he was humorous, he was social, cultured, just a big energy person. And now he's in a nursing home, and he has a bed and a nightstand and a wheelchair. And that's the circle of his life. And he is the most heart-open man still. He jokes with the nurses. Shelley tells me every week about these funny things that he does, and he has them all laughing. He still thinks about his daughter and cares for her. And he's very adamant about how his taxes are done because he was a CFO. And I think, could I do that? Could I do that? Could I keep my heart open in those circumstances? And I think that's really the question. How do we, no matter what falls, work with our consciousness to be the best of who we can be? Wendy Lessbatter is a social worker who's an expert in the field of aging. She's written several books. And one of her recent books talks about, as we get older, life gets better and better. In every way, ... except the body. And I think that that's part of what we're being called to do in this stage, is to bring those two parts of ourselves together and to hold them together. That it's both better in many ways and it's also harder in many ways. And so how do we hold that together? That's really our challenge. So how does life get better? Let's talk about that for a little bit. Well, we have more time, we have more freedom, don't we? And we get to use that time in ways that can be I think there's also a way that as we get older, there's a desire for more inner work, for more spiritual work, if you will, and for things that really have meaning, and less interest in things that are sort of superficial. So as we have this more time, we can do things that can be very meaningful for us. Like think about, what kind of a legacy do we want to leave? What kind of legacy do we want to leave behind us? And what kind of legacy do we want to live into in our world right now? I think of Olga Murphy, who started the Nepalese Youth Opportunity Fund in her 80s. And she said, I kind of thought if I just stayed home, I was just going to get old. So she said, I decided to go out and use my energy. And so she goes to Nepal every year and she does amazing work over there. That was her way of leaving a legacy. And there's so many other different ways. I think of a grandmother who has very consciously decided to spiritually mentor her grandchildren. And she's intentionally paying attention to their worldview, their beliefs, their assumptions about life. And if they start to go into their lower forms of consciousness, she thinks about how she's going to design activities, conversations, and ways for them to be expanded and uplifted. And I think that's so beautiful. Because the parents don't have time to do that, right? They're thinking about lunches and carpools and working, and they're in the full of life. So they don't have the time to really think at this level. We have time to heal old wounds and betrayals. If we haven't really got all of that finished yet and we're still getting triggered by things, we can give it one more round. We can harvest our strengths, love, and wisdom. I think of my older sister. She has metastatic breast cancer. And she's in a support group of others who are also dealing with that in their life. And it's run by a prominent Stanford psychologist. And what she does is she has them look at how they've used their love to meet the challenges in their life in the past, and what values they have stood for in their life, and what their personality traits are that they really value. And she has them bring all of that to their death and dying process so that they are both grieving their lives and what's about to be their deaths, but they're also doing it in a way that's empowered, that's loving, and that's meaningful. And I think that's so beautiful. And that's part of a life review process. We have the privilege of looking backwards at our age and seeing the patterns of our life. We have many decades behind us. And what can we learn in looking backwards? That's something we can do as we age. And as to the ... yes, there are other stresses of aging. And, sometimes we want to deny those stresses. There's a lot of people that just do not want to talk about aging. They don't want to talk about anything related to it. They sort of figure, when I get there, I get there. And I understand that. But I think there can be an unintended consequence of not looking death squarely in the eye or looking at our aging process. And some of those are, it's important for us to develop skills for mindfulness and self-compassion to deal with things that may come up that may be challenging. And if we have that muscle, we're going to be ready to deal with that. It helps us also, I think, to develop a heart of compassion for others who are dealing with things that are very stressful for them, that we can companion them and look and be with them. And it also means that we are very cogent that our time is limited. We don't have those 40-year time horizons that we used to have, or 50-year time horizons that we thought we had anyway. Now we have a shorter time horizon, and how do we want to use that time in the most meaningful way? That's really important. And I think when you really embody your mortality, it can help you to make important choices as to how you want to live your life today. We all know what the stresses of aging are, right? We all know solo aging, death, and the different ways that the deterioration of the body can happen. Those are very stressful situations. And we just don't want to turn away from people who are dealing with that. We want to give them hope, and we want to give them meaning. And the tools of consciousness can help us to do that. So I like to liken what happens to us as we age as sort of like a card game. We get dealt a hand. And in the hand, we don't know what we're going to get. Are we going to get the longevity card? Are we going to get the able-bodied card? Are we going to get the able-mind card? Are we going to have our loved ones around us? We don't know what's in our card, our hand. And that alone can be stressful for people. So the question is, how do we deal with the hand that we're dealt and avoid letting those challenges keep us in limitation or isolation, to increase our ability to stay in love and to transform difficulties? How do we do that? I think of a woman that I know who lost her husband of 40 years. And after his death, she became a professional widow. She was bitter, sad, depressed, and she calcified around those qualities. And she wasn't able to move on with that for 10 years. So how do we avoid that? I read this recently by Richard Rohr, who's written a great book on aging. Pain that isn't transformed is transmitted. If we can't transform psychological and emotional pain that we're dealing with, it's not just hurting us. We're out picturing that to our loved ones, to our caregivers, to our community. So how do we move on with those? Well, that gets us to the noetic sciences and everything that we know about transformation. Even if you're denying your death, at a certain point, a thunderbolt may come into your life in the form of a diagnosis, a loss of a loved one. And all of a sudden, that denial that we've been putting off about our aging may come home to roost in the form of a thunderbolt. So, of course, the Institute of Noetic Sciences has done multi-year long research projects on transformation. We looked at what are the fertile grounds for transformation, what makes a transformation of consciousness sustainable, and can we learn anything about the different wisdom traditions about transformation and what will make it stick. And the fruit of those years of research are embodied in our book, Living Deeply, The Art and Science of Transformation in Everyday Life. And it starts with this model of transformation, and the starting point is a noetic experience. That's the beginning of the circle. A noetic experience, an aha moment, an epiphany, or a thunderbolt. All of a sudden, life as we knew it before, and as we're going to experience it in the future, is completely different. It's completely different. It's not going to be the same. So how do we deal with that? And to talk about this, I'd like to imagine that you have two bubbles. A left-hand bubble, you have our lower qualities of consciousness. Fear, limitation, lack, isolation. And on the right hand, you have all of the higher qualities of consciousness. Love, kindness, compassion, forgiveness, interdependence, gratitude. Now, we'd all like to live permanently, I would say, in that right-hand bubble, right? We want to be in the love and the kindness and the compassion. But we're human. We go back and forth. I go to church and I'm feeling very empowered, and I get on the freeway and somebody cuts me off and I'm amygdala hijack, screaming at the person. But, hopefully I get myself out of it and get back to, more of a loving person. And that's part of what we're trying to do as we work on ourselves, is to stay in that loving circle as often as we can, as long as we can, and in many ways as we can. But sometimes when these thunderbolts happen, it can take us back to this left-hand circle, and we stay there, like the woman whose husband died, and she calcified around these qualities of fear, lack, and limitation. She calcified there, and she just became a little bubble of those lower qualities of vibration, and she couldn't be present to life. And she couldn't be present to her adult daughter, who needed and wanted her love. She wanted her to see her and to be alive with her, but she couldn't All she could do was be in this circle. And that's not only a loss for her, but a loss for her daughter. So going back to the hearts, how do we keep an open and accessible heart, no matter what befalls us, no matter what thunderbolt comes in, no matter if we're in that nursing home in that small bed, how do we still keep an open heart? That's, to me, the essence of transformation, and it's the essence of conscious aging. So the noetic sciences teach us all, for all of our work in consciousness studies, to pay attention to these things, our intentions, where we give our attention, what our worldview is, how we make meaning in life, and listening deep inside. So these things we bring to our aging process as well, and looking at how we can move from that left-hand circle to that right-hand circle. So I'll take a couple and give examples. Firstly, intention. I have one in my personal life that's been very meaningful for me. A colleague at IONS told me a story about a time he was involved in an earthquake. And he was in bed asleep at 5:30 in the morning, and this big earthquake came in California and threw his bed across the room. And he woke up in a startle, and he thought, oh my God, I'm going to die. And then he had another thought after he breathed, and he thought, if I'm going to die right now, I want to die in love. And he said, I screamed out, I choose love. I choose love. And then the earthquake was over and he didn't die. But I thought that was such a great story, because I thought, well, gosh, that's right. If you're going to die under extreme circumstances like that, don't you want to die in love? And I thought, I'm going to borrow that, and I'm going to take that inside of me. And if anything happens to me or a loved one, that's what I'm going to claim for them. Fast forward many years, my husband of 32 years was in the ER under very awful circumstances. He was dying. And I was in a panic, and the nurses and the doctors and tubes and all these things were happening. And I remembered that. I honestly remembered that. And I said, this is your moment right now. There'll be time for grief. You've got years to grieve, right? There'll be time for sadness. Right now, your husband is transitioning, and make that be loving. And I was able to inflate into love. And that's what I held and carried for him. And he had a beautiful, in that way, death. And that's the power of intention. That's the power of intention. Moving on, attention. Do we say that we really value our grandchildren, but then we look at our time and, well, we don't really spend a lot of time there with our attention. So how are we using our attention? That's very noetic. Where are we spending our attention and reflecting on that? And we spend time on that in conscious aging. Worldview and limiting beliefs. This is a big one. We may have things that happen to us as we age. Maybe our hearing is starting to go, our vision, our joints. Different things are changing in the body. But what do we tell ourselves about that? If we tell ourselves, oh, I'm no good, I'm a has-been, nobody will want to be with me, I can't go out anymore, whatever kind of negative, self-defeating scripts we may be layering on top of that, we are really limiting ourselves. So those of you who have done the program will resonate with the lesson session on self-compassion, where we unpack what are you telling yourselves about this, and how can you reframe those messages so they're more empowering. This was a very big issue at a very large retirement community that we worked at in Marin County, where the social workers told us this is a big issue. Our seniors are very much coming down on themselves about being clumsy or forgetful or slow motion. These things are happening to them, but they're telling themselves these limiting stories, and they're isolating. Can you help? Yes, we can. We can look at our limitations in what we're saying to ourselves. Another example of this is there was an artist on the Transforming Summit. He loves to paint aging bodies. And he said, an aging body is in the winter of its life. And we wouldn't look at the seasons of the year and judge winter to be bad. It's just winter. But what's the value that our mind puts on? Do we look at somebody who's aging and kind of look with disgust at wrinkles or sags or droops? Or do we look and love that body? That's our consciousness. That's our consciousness. So how do we make our worldview is very important. And of course, inner knowing. So the tasks of conscious aging are then these: to reframe our limiting beliefs and self-defeating thoughts, to reflect on our lives, to see where we've used our love and our strengths of character to meet past challenges so that we can bring that forward positively to our aging, to heal old wounds and betrayals, let go of things, relationships and activities that need to be surrendered, to let the youth have the things of the youth, to let the middle-aged have the things of middle age. We have the things of the third phase of life, and they are beautiful. And rewiring our intentions and our vision for aging, and to focus on what really has heart and meaning. This is how consciousness helps us to age. And this is how the Institute of Noetic Sciences is building on our research on transformation to bring that out in the world so that it becomes more popularized. Many people in this room may have been part of Noetic Sciences for many years, and you may know these things very well, but we hope to popularize them out. And just like yoga has spread out, consciousness is spreading out now, and you're all helping to do that. So that's the end of my remarks, my formal remarks. Here we go, thank you. So I just wanted to open up the floor if anyone has any questions about all of that we've just unpacked in that presentation. Yes, your question.
Could you speak a little more about, you said, we want to give them hope and meaning. Could you speak about what kind of hope? I'm assuming it's a realistic hopefulness, but can you talk more about that?
Yeah, I can. And I would go back to the story I told about my sister's metastatic breast cancer. We can't cure her cancer. She's going to die. And yet, how can we give her a hope and meaning about that? So the psychologist who's working in the way that I described is an example. Hope means being able to use our love and our higher consciousness in the process that's unfolding without trying to cure it. Okay? Any other questions, observations, thoughts? There's one over there.
I just wanted to know, when you talked about consciousness matters, at the very bottom, you had a sentence that was very important, but it's not in our book. You talk about no one knows, knowing yet is fully defined consciousness. And at the bottom, we know it's there and we can at least, and that's as far as I got. Okay, sorry. We know it's there and we can at least define it in general terms, describe it in general terms. So at IONS, we bring a lot of different people together to talk about their research on consciousness, their theories on consciousness. We describe it, but it's still a mystery.
I had somewhat of a question. And some of the things I've read, they have compared consciousness with our soul. Because also that's an intangible thing, and we know it's there.
Yes.
But,
yes.
We can feel its presence, but
yes.
We can't explain it really.
Yes.
And then just to add to that, I had that come to me when I was considering this program, when I had my 98-year-old client, and I was talking to her and looking at her, but I didn't see her physical body anymore. We were talking soul to soul. And then that's when it came to me that the physical body just starts to disappear when the love comes in.
Yes. Yes. Thank you.
I just wanted to say how much I appreciated and resonated with your remarks from my personal history. Thank you.
Thank you. Any last minute questions? Otherwise, we'll move on to our next activity. Looks like we're complete. Okay.